The morning of Miss Lenora Kent's wedding dawned bright and brittle, the kind of April day that promises warmth and delivers only a sharp, insistent wind. Inside St. George's, Hanover Square, the air was thick with the scent of hothouse lilies and the particular perfume of 200 members of the ton packed shoulder to shoulder, their anticipation already souring toward impatience. Lenora stood in the vestibule, her hand resting on her father's arm. The ivory silk of her gown had been stitched by French hands, paid for with money old Lord Kent could scarcely spare, and the pearls at her throat had belonged to a grandmother who would have counseled against marrying a duke on principle. The grandmother had been dead 12 years, and Lenora had not thought of her in at least 5. She thought of her now. Late, her father muttered, consulting his pocket watch for the 17th time. 20 minutes. This is an insult. It is 20 minutes, Papa. Traffic, perhaps. A loose stone in a horse's shoe. She did not believe any of it. Alexander Montclair, 6th Duke of Ashworth, was many things, arrogant, remote, possessed of a self-assurance that bordered on spiritual certainty. But he was not unpunctual. In 3 months of courtship and 2 months of engagement, he had never once been late. He arrived precisely when he intended to, and his intentions were always clear. That had been the problem, she realized now. His intentions had been clear, hers had been compliant. 30 minutes. The rector approached, hands clasped, face arranged in the careful blankness of a man who has presided over enough society weddings to recognize disaster in its early stages. Miss Kent, perhaps if we began the opening hymn while we wait. There will be no hymn, Lenora said. Not yet. 40 minutes. The whispers began in earnest. Lady Dalrymple's fan moved with the speed of a hummingbird's wing. Old Lord Breckenridge, who had opposed the match on the grounds that the Kents were insufficiently ancient, allowed himself a thin smile. Somewhere behind her, Lenora heard a young woman laugh, the sound cut off too quickly. At the hour mark, Lenora's mother began to weep. It was a quiet, dignified weeping, muffled into a lace handkerchief, but it was weeping nonetheless. Her father's face had gone the color of uncooked pastry. "Take me home," Lady Kent whispered. "Charles, take me home, I cannot bear it." Lenora turned from the doors. She did not look at the guests. She did not look at the flowers, the candles, the perfect ivory runner stretching toward an altar she would never reach. She looked at her father. "The carriage," she said, "if you please." "Lenora." "The carriage, not to the house." She paused, "to the docks." Her father stared. Her mother's weeping stuttered to a halt. Behind them, the collective intake of breath from 200 members of the Hout Ton was a sound like wind through dry grass. "The docks," Lenora repeated. "Aunt Honoria's cottage in Porthelloe. The key is in her desk. I know where it is. I will require a few things from the house. You may send them or not as you wish." "Lenora, the Duke may yet." "The Duke," she said, "is not coming, and I find that I am no longer waiting." She walked the length of the aisle in her wedding gown, past the gaping guests, past the scandalized rector, past her mother's frozen grief and her father's swelling indignation. The heavy oak doors swung open. Sunlight struck her face. The wind pulled at her veil. She did not look back. The carriage ride to the London docks passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Lenora sat with her hands folded in her lap, the ivory silk pooling around her like spilled milk. Her maid, a young woman named Bess who had been with her 3 years, kept her eyes fixed on the window and said nothing at all. At the docks, Lenora stepped down from the carriage still wearing her wedding gown. Sailors stared. A fishwife crossing the cobblestones stopped dead. Lenora walked to the harbormaster's office and inquired, in a voice as calm as still water, about passage to Cornwall. The harbormaster, a grizzled man named Trelawney who had seen too much of the world to be surprised by any of it, sold her a berth on a merchant vessel leaving with the evening tide. She paid in coins taken from the reticule still looped around her wrist, money meant for the wedding breakfast, for the champagne her father could not afford, for the celebration of a future that had never existed. She stood at the rail as London receded, the great dome of St. Paul's growing small against a sky streaked with evening color. Bess hovered nearby, a shawl clutched in her hands. "Miss," Bess ventured, "your gown. It will be ruined by the sea air." Lenora looked down at the silk, at the tiny pearls stitched along the bodice, at the hem already stained with London mud. "Good," she said. Alexander Montclair, 6th Duke of Ashworth, rode into the courtyard of his London townhouse with his horse lathered and his hands raw from the reins. He had not slept in 36 hours. He had not eaten in longer. His coat was covered in dust, and his cravat had come untied somewhere outside reading. His butler met him at the door. The man's face was a study in controlled dread. "Your Grace, there has been—" "I know," Alexander said, shouldering past him into the hall. "My mother, I received the letter, I rode to Bath. She was not there." "Your Grace, your mother is in the drawing-room. She arrived from Bath this morning. She is perfectly well. The matter I must—" Then the letter was a forgery. Alexander was already striding toward the drawing-room, his boots striking the marble with the force of a hammer. "Someone has played a cruel and elaborate jest, and when I discover who—" "Your Grace!" The butler's voice rose, an act of desperation so extreme that Alexander stopped. In 20 years of service, Simmons had never raised his voice. "The church, St. George's, the wedding." Alexander went still. "What of it?" Simmons could not meet his eyes. "You did not arrive, Your Grace. The ceremony was to begin at 11. Miss Kent waited, the guests waited. At noon she left. There is talk of a scene. I do not know the particulars. Lord Kent has issued a statement to the Times. It is not favorable to this house." The drawing-room doors opened. His mother stood there, very much alive, very much not dying in Bath, her face pale with an emotion Alexander had never seen on her before. Fear. "Alexander," the Dowager Duchess said, "I came as soon as I heard. The letter, I never sent any letter. I have been in Bath taking the waters. I have been in excellent health. Someone has—" "I know what someone has done." His voice was strange to his own ears, hollow. "Simmons, when did you receive word of the wedding's outcome?" "A little after 1 o'clock, Your Grace. The first guests returned to their homes. The gossip reached our kitchens within the hour. I sent 3 riders to intercept you on the Bath road. It appears they did not find you." Alexander had taken a shortcut across country, a farmer's track through Wiltshire. He had been so determined to reach his dying mother's bedside that he had ridden through hedgerows and forded streams. His riders would have passed him unseen, carrying the truth while he carried a lie. "Where is she now?" Simmons hesitated. "Miss Kent, Your Grace, she is gone. No one knows precisely where. She was seen at the London docks. She boarded a merchant vessel. A sailor reported she was dressed still in her wedding gown. Lord Kent's house is closed. The family is not receiving visitors." The drawing-room felt airless. Alexander walked to the window and stood looking out at the perfect square of St. James's, where carriages rolled past and pedestrians strolled, and the world continued exactly as it had, indifferent to the catastrophe that had swallowed him whole. "A forgery," he said quietly. "The letter was delivered by hand yesterday morning. It bore my mother's seal. It described a sudden collapse, a physician's grave prognosis, a plea for me to come at once. I did not question it. Why would I question it?" "Because someone wished you to," his mother said. "Someone who understood that only a family emergency would keep you from your own wedding. Someone who knew you well." He turned from the window. "Who?" "I have my suspicions. There is a young woman who has been attentive, Lady Honoria Whitmore. She called here twice in the week before the wedding. She asked a great many questions about family correspondence, about seals, about the route to Bath. I thought nothing of it at the time. She claimed to be planning a surprise for the wedding breakfast." Lady Honoria Whitmore, daughter of the Earl of Cranley. She had smiled at him at the Martindale ball. She had expressed regret, such deep regret, that he was to be married. She had laughed and called it a loss to all unwed ladies of the ton. He had not listened. He had been thinking of Lenora. "I will destroy her," Alexander said. It was not a threat. It was a statement of intent, delivered in the same tone he used to discuss crop rotation with his steward. "First," his mother said, "you must find Lenora." "I know. Do you know where she has gone?" He thought of Lenora Kent, her quiet voice, her steady gaze, the way she had looked at him during their engagement dinner when he had spoken at length about the estate and the duties of a duchess and the importance of producing an heir. She had nodded. She had smiled. She had asked no questions. He had mistaken her silence for agreement. He had mistaken her stillness for contentment. He had been, he now understood, a complete and utter fool. "Her aunt had a cottage in Cornwall," he said slowly. "Honoria Kent. She died 2 years ago. Lenora spoke of it once, Porthellow, a fishing village. She said the sea there smelled of salt and gorse. It is not much to go on. It is enough." He left the drawing-room without another word. In his study, he found a map of Cornwall and traced the coastline with a finger grown steady through force of will. Porthellow, a small cove south of the Helford River. He would find her. He would explain. He would bring her back to London, restore her reputation, give her the wedding she deserved. But even as the plan formed, another thought rose beneath it, dark and cold as winter water. He had ridden through hedgerows and forded streams, racing toward a dying mother who was not dying. He had not hesitated. He had not questioned. He had simply gone. Lenora had waited an hour, and then she had walked to the docks in her wedding gown. He had not been the only one capable of leaving. The cottage in Porthellow sat at the end of a lane so narrow that no carriage could pass. It was built of local stone, gray and solid, with a slate roof patched in 3 places and a garden that had run wild after 2 years of neglect. Lenora had been there a week before she stopped waking at dawn, expecting the sound of London traffic. It had been a month before she stopped listening for footsteps on the path. 6 months now. The garden was tamed. The roses had been pruned and the vegetable beds planted. She kept a journal of the local wildflowers, pressing specimens between the pages, noting the patterns of bloom and seed. The village accepted her with the cautious curiosity of people who had seen strangers come and go and learned not to invest too quickly. She was Miss Kent, the London lady. She was quiet. She paid her accounts promptly. She did not attend church, which drew some comment, but she did not complain about the damp or the fish smell or the long winter nights, which drew respect. She had not read a London newspaper in 5 months. She had instructed Bess to burn any letter that arrived from her parents, from society acquaintances, from anyone who might use the words duty or scandal or return. Bess complied with a grim satisfaction that suggested she had wanted to burn London letters for years. The morning Lord Theodore Montclair arrived, Lenora was kneeling in the garden, her hands sunk into the earth, her hair tied back with a fraying ribbon. She heard the horse before she saw the rider, not a local beast, too fine-boned, too well-shod. She straightened, wiping dirt from her palms, and watched him dismount at the gate. He was younger than Alexander by perhaps 5 years, leaner in the face, with the same dark hair but a different way of holding himself. Where Alexander moved like a man accustomed to owning whatever ground he stood on, this man moved like someone who had spent his life stepping carefully around larger presences. "Miss Kent," he bowed, "my name is Theodore Montclair, I am." "I know who you are." She had seen a miniature once in Alexander's study, a younger brother away at university, then traveling. Alexander spoke of him rarely and with a particular tension she had never been able to interpret. "You have ridden a long way, Lord Theodore. I will fetch you water." She did not invite him inside. She brought a cup to the garden gate and handed it to him across the stone wall, a deliberate barrier. He drank, and she studied him. "How did you find me?" "Harbour Master Trelawney keeps records. A woman in a wedding gown is memorable. From there, it was a matter of asking along the coast. You did not hide yourself. I did not think I needed to. Theodore set the cup on the wall. His face was serious, marked by a tension that went beyond the awkwardness of the encounter. I have come because there are things you do not know, things my brother has been unable to tell you because you will not read his letters. I will not. Then hear them from me, please. The please was unexpected. Lenora had been prepared for aristocratic presumption, for the easy confidence of a duke's emissary. Theodore Montclair looked instead like a man delivering a heavy weight and uncertain of his reception. Speak then. He told her everything. The forged letter, written on paper identical to the Dowager Duchess's personal stationery. The seal, expertly copied. Lady Honoria Whitmore, who had visited the ducal townhouse, who had asked questions about family correspondence, who had been seen speaking with a known forger in a Cheapside tavern 3 days before the letter was delivered. The confession, extracted not by Alexander but by the Dowager Duchess herself, who had confronted Lady Honoria in her own drawing-room and refused to leave until the truth was spoken. Lady Honoria has been sent to the continent, Theodore said. Her family hopes the scandal will fade. It will not. My mother has seen to that. The truth is known, Miss Kent. The papers have printed it. Your reputation is restored. Lenora looked at the garden. The bean plants were flowering. She had been meaning to stake them. My reputation, she said, was never the thing I was concerned about. Theodore was silent. She felt his gaze on her, curious, reassessing. My brother does not know I am here, he said. He is still searching for you himself. He has been to half the villages in Cornwall. I came because I thought you should know the truth before he finds you, if he finds you. I thought you deserved to make your choice with all the facts before you. Your brother would not thank you for that. My brother, Theodore said quietly, has had everything in his life handed to him by virtue of his title and his face and his particular brand of certainty. I love him, but he has never had to earn anything that mattered. I thought perhaps he should have to earn you. Lenora turned to look at him. The younger brother, the one who stepped carefully, the one who had ridden across Cornwall to give a fallen woman the truth her fallen duke could not deliver. You are not what I expected, Lord Theodore. Few people expect anything of me at all. He smiled, and the smile was unexpectedly warm. It gives me a great deal of freedom. He left before sunset, refusing her offer of supper, claiming he had rooms at an inn 3 villages over. Lenora stood at her gate and watched him ride away, the cup still sitting on the stone wall where he had placed it. She did not burn this news. She carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and sat looking at it until the light failed. Alexander arrived on a Thursday, when the sky was the color of pewter, and the sea churned with the memory of a distant storm. Lenora saw him coming from the cliff path, a tall figure on a horse that was too fine for the terrain, picking his way down the lane with the careful tread of an animal that did not trust the ground. She had 2 weeks to prepare. Theodore's visit had been a warning as much as a revelation. She had used the time well. She had rehearsed what she would say. She had imagined the scene a dozen times, the confrontation, the demand for forgiveness, the offer of a second chance wrapped in ducal privilege. She was wrong about all of it. He dismounted at the gate, exactly as Theodore had done, but there the resemblance ended. Alexander Montclair looked like a man who had been hollowed out and reassembled by someone who had only a rough description to work from. His coat was good wool but travel-stained. His boots were muddy. His face was thinner, the bones sharper, the eyes shadowed in a way that spoke of sleepless nights. He did not speak at first. He stood at the gate, one hand resting on the stone, and looked at her as though she were a landmark he had been navigating toward for a very long time and had begun to fear did not exist. Lenora. Your Grace. The title landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. She saw the ripple of it move across his face. "I have brought you something." He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather portfolio, thick with papers. The forged letter, Lady Honoria's confession, signed and witnessed, the newspaper accounts, your father's statement of. "I know all of this." He stopped. "You know. Your brother rode here 2 weeks ago. He thought I deserved to hear the truth from someone who was not you." Something moved in Alexander's face. Surprise. Then a flicker of something sharper, anger perhaps, or the familial equivalent. Then nothing. The mask she remembered from London drawing rooms, the perfect ducal blankness. "Theodore," he said, "I see." He was kind, he did not press. He left when I asked him to. "I am not Theodore." "You are not." He opened the gate. She did not give him permission. He did not ask. He walked into the garden, the portfolio still in his hand, and stopped a careful distance from her. The wind pulled at his hair. The sea crashed against the cliffs below. "I have been searching for you for 6 months," he said. "I have ridden to every village on this coast. I have made inquiries in ports from Falmouth to Penzance. I have written letters you would not read and sent messengers you would not receive. I have done everything I know how to do, and none of it has been enough. So I have come to ask you directly, what would be enough?" Lenora looked at him. The Duke of Ashworth, the most eligible man in London, the man she had agreed to marry once when she had been a different woman. "Read the papers," she said. "Leave them with me, I will look at them." "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer I have." He placed the portfolio on the stone wall, next to the cup Theodore had left behind 2 weeks ago. His eyes moved to it, then back to her face. He said nothing about it. "I am staying at the Shipwrights' Arms," he said. "In the village. I will be there if you wish to speak further." "I know where the inn is." He nodded. He turned to go. At the gate he paused. "Theodore was right," he said. "You deserve to hear the truth from someone. I am only sorry it was not me." He rode away. Lenora stood in the garden, the wind off the sea sharp with salt, and watched until he was gone. The portfolio sat on the wall for an hour before she touched it. When she finally opened it, she read everything. The forged letter in its careful imitation of the dowager's hand. The confession in Lady Honoria's looping script, full of self-justification and barely suppressed fury. The newspaper clippings, which restored her name and condemned her former rival. Her father's statement, which was stiff and proud and managed to make even her vindication sound like an inconvenience. She read it all. Then she closed the portfolio and walked down to the shore, where the tide was coming in and the gulls were crying, and the world was reduced to water and stone, and the endless gray sky. She had told Alexander she would look at the papers. She had done so. She had not told him what she would do after. The Duke of Ashworth remained in Porthelloe for 3 weeks. He did not press his suit. He did not call at the cottage. He did not send letters or flowers or emissaries. He took rooms at the Shipwrights' Arms, a modest establishment that had never housed a duke and was uncertain whether to be honored or alarmed. He ate the plain food without complaint. He drank the local ale. He walked the cliffs every morning, regardless of weather, and returned with his boots caked in mud and his face whipped red by the wind. The village watched him. The village talked. A duke was a rare creature in these parts, rarer than a basking shark in the bay and considerably more interesting. Mrs. Trevethan, the innkeeper's wife, reported that he was a quiet guest, polite, undemanding. He had helped her husband repair a loose shutter. He had carried old Mrs. Pengelly's shopping up the hill. He had asked no questions about Miss Kent. Lenora heard these reports because Bess heard them at the market and brought them back like a cat bringing mice. Dropped at Lenora's feet with an expression that clearly said, "Do something with this." "He helped Farmer Tregonning mend a wall," Bess said one morning, setting a basket of mackerel on the kitchen table. "Lifted stones for 3 hours. Mr. Tregonning said he knew what he was about, said his hands blistered and he did not complain." "Fascinating," Lenora said. "He asked about the tide tables. Old Mr. Carn at the harbor said he wanted to know when the mackerel were running. A ducal interest in fisheries, how progressive. Bess gave her a look that had 3 years of service and considerable impertinence behind it. He is not what I expected. Lenora said nothing. She had been thinking the same thing. She saw him sometimes on the cliffs. He kept his distance, a solitary figure against the sky, and she did not approach him. But she watched. She could not help watching. The way he moved had changed. The London Duke had walked like a man who expected the ground to accommodate him. This man walked like someone who had learned to accommodate the ground. On the 19th day, the storm came. It blew in from the Atlantic with a fury that surprised even the fishermen, who had read the signs and pulled their boats high up the shingle. The wind shrieked. The sea boiled white. Rain drove horizontally against the cottages, finding every gap in every window frame, every loose slate on every roof. Lenora was alone. Bess had gone to visit her sister in Falmouth and been delayed by the weather. The fire was lit. The candles were burning. Outside, the world was a roar of water and wind. The knock came during the worst of it. She opened the door and he was there, soaked through, his coat plastered to his shoulders and his hair a dark tangle. Water streamed down his face. He looked like a man who had been shipwrecked. "The inn's roof," he said, raising his voice over the wind. "A section has come away. Mrs. Trevethan is housing half the village in her kitchen. She sent me here. She said your cottage was the strongest built on the lane." Lenora stepped aside. He entered, dripping onto the stone floor, and stood awkwardly in the small kitchen while she fetched a blanket and stoked the fire. "Sit," she said, "before you catch your death and I am blamed for the loss of a duke." He sat. The firelight carved shadows into his face. He was thinner than she remembered from London, the planes of his cheeks sharper, the line of his jaw harder. He looked like a man who had been broken down to his essentials. They did not speak for a long time. The storm howled. The cottage held. "Theodore told you the truth," he said. "I am grateful to him for that, but he did not tell you everything." "What did he omit?" "He did not tell you that I knew something was wrong before the wedding, that I felt it, that you were distant in those last weeks, and I told myself it was bridal nerves. I did not ask. I did not push. I assumed you would come to me when you were ready. I assumed a great many things." Lenora watched the fire. The flames were blue at the center, gold at the edges. "What else?" "I assumed you wanted the same life I wanted. The London house, the estate, the duties, the title. I assumed that because you said yes to my proposal, you had said yes to all of it. I did not ask what you were giving up. I did not ask what you were afraid of. I did not ask enough questions." He paused. The fire crackled. "When I arrived at the church and found it empty, I thought first of the scandal, of the insult, of what it would mean for my name, my house, my position. It was not until later, not until I had ridden home and sat alone in my study, that I thought of you, standing there, waiting, in your wedding gown, with 200 people watching." His voice was steady, but something in it was raw, scraped clean of pretense. "I have imagined it," he said. "Every day for 6 months, I have imagined your face. I have imagined what you must have felt. And I have known, with a certainty I cannot explain, that the man you agreed to marry would not have been worth waiting for." Lenora looked at him. The Duke, the stranger, the man who had lifted stones for a farmer and mended a shutter and asked about mackerel. "Why are you still here?" she asked. "Because I am trying to become someone who would be." The storm raged. The fire burned. And Lenora, who had walked out of a church 6 months ago with her head high and her heart sealed shut, felt the first crack in the wall she had built. She did not answer him, but she did not ask him to leave. News traveled slowly to Cornwall, but it traveled. A month after the storm, a letter arrived from Lenora's father. She recognized the handwriting, the heavy black ink, the seal with the Kent crest pressed into wax the color of old blood. She read it standing in the garden, her hands still dusted with soil. My daughter, the matter of Lady Honoria Whitmore has been resolved. She has departed for the continent and her family has withdrawn from society. Your name has been cleared in the press and in the drawing rooms. The Duke of Ashworth has made his intentions clear. He wishes to renew his suit. It is your duty to accept. Your mother's health suffers from the strain of your absence. Your sister's prospects are diminished. You have made your point. Come home. Lenora read the letter twice. Then she walked inside, placed it in the hearth, and set it alight. Bess watched from the kitchen doorway. Bad news. Predictable news. The letter burned to ash. Lenora watched the fire consume it, the black ink curling, the heavy paper blackening. When it was gone, she felt nothing but a clean, sharp relief. She had made her point. Her father thought this was about a point, about pride, about a woman's tantrum dressed up as principal. He did not understand. He had never understood. The second piece of news arrived a week later, brought by a fisherman who had heard it from a cousin in Falmouth who had read it in a London paper 3 weeks out of date. Lady Honoria Whitmore, disgraced and exiled, had attempted to marry a minor Prussian nobleman. The nobleman, upon learning the full extent of her history, had withdrawn his offer. She was now living in reduced circumstances in a spa town in Bavaria. Her prospects vanished, her name a cautionary tale. Lenora felt no satisfaction. She had expected to. She had imagined, in the dark months after her flight, what it would feel like to see her enemy brought low. But the woman in the Bavarian spa town was a stranger, and the woman who had stood in St. George's in her wedding gown was a stranger too. They had both been destroyed by the same machinery. Only one of them had chosen to walk away. Alexander continued to stay at the Shipwrights' Arms. He had been there 7 weeks now. He had become, improbably, a fixture of the village. He attended church. He drank at the tavern. He had learned the names of every fisherman's child and every widow's cat. He had helped repair the harbor wall after a spring tide damaged it. The village had stopped calling him Your Grace and started calling him the Duke, the way they might say the blacksmith or the rector, a title worn down by familiarity into something almost fond. He did not ask Lenora for anything. He was simply there, a steady presence, a man living a life that required nothing of her. It was this, in the end, that undid her. One evening she walked to the Shipwrights' Arms. The tap-room was warm and loud, full of fishermen and farmers and the particular hilarity that comes from a long day's work and a short night's drinking. Alexander was in the corner, his back to the wall, a tankard of ale before him. He was talking to old Mr. Carne about pilchard seasons. He looked up when she entered. The tankard stopped halfway to his lips. The tap-room continued its noise, oblivious. "Miss Kent," he rose, "is something wrong?" "No, I came to speak with you." He followed her outside without question. The evening was cool, the sky deepening toward night, the sea a distant murmur beyond the harbor wall. They walked to the quay and stood looking out at the fishing boats riding at anchor. "My father has written," she said. "He demands I return to London. He says my duty is to accept your renewed suit." Alexander was silent. "I burned his letter," Lenora said. "I have spent 6 months building a life that belongs to me, not to my father, not to society, not to a husband who sees me as an accessory to his title. I will not return to London as a duchess. I will not return to London at all." "I know," Alexander said. "Do you?" "I have known since the 3rd week, when you did not send me away after the storm, when you let me stay in the village and did not bar your door. You are not waiting for me to convince you. You are waiting for me to understand that there is nothing I can offer that would be worth giving up what you have built here." Lenora turned to look at him. In the fading light, his face was all shadows and planes, the sharp bones, the steady eyes. He was not the man she had agreed to marry. That man had been a stranger, a collection of titles and assumptions, a life she had been expected to fit herself into like a graft onto an alien tree. This man was something else, something that had grown slowly in difficult soil under harsh weather. You said once that you were trying to become someone worth waiting for, she said. Have you succeeded? I do not know. That is not for me to decide. She almost smiled. The arrogant Duke, learning humility at last. It had taken a ruined wedding, a forged letter, and 7 weeks in a fishing village, but he had learned it. I am not offering you a title, he said quietly. I am not offering you a London house or a place in society or any of the things I once assumed you wanted. I am offering you myself, whatever that is worth. If it is not enough, I will leave. If it is, I will stay, on whatever terms you set. The sea sighed against the harbor wall. A gull called somewhere in the darkening sky. I will think on it, Lenora said. That is all I can promise. It is more than I deserve. She left him on the quay and walked back to her cottage, past the roses and the bean plants and the stone wall where he had first left her the evidence of her vindication. The cottage was dark. Bess had gone to bed. The fire had burned low. Lenora sat in the darkness and thought about terms, about what she wanted, about what she was willing to give. She had spent 6 months learning to be alone. She had become good at it. The question was whether she was willing to become good at something else. Dawn came slowly to the Cornish coast, the light seeping through a bank of cloud like water through gauze. Lenora had not slept. She had sat by the dying fire until the embers cooled to ash, and then she had risen, wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and walked out into the morning. The air smelled of salt and gorse. The gulls were waking, their cries sharp against the hush of the retreating tide. She walked the cliff path she had walked 100 times, the path she had first taken when she arrived 6 months ago, still wearing her wedding gown, still carrying the weight of a life that had been wrenched apart. She knew where she would find him. He was standing at the highest point of the headland looking out at the sea. His back was to her. His coat was the same one he had worn through the storm, patched now at the elbow where Mrs. Trevethan had mended it. He did not look like a duke. He looked like a man who had been shaped by wind and weather into something simpler, something truer. He heard her footsteps on the grass and turned. Lenora. Alexander. It was the first time she had spoken his name since the day she had stood in St. George's and waited for him. The sound of it felt strange in her mouth, familiar and foreign all at once. I have been thinking, she said, about terms. He waited, the wind moved through his hair, the sea crashed below. I will not come back to London. I will not be a duchess in the way society expects. I will not host balls or manage a great house or navigate the gossip of the ton. I have built a life here. It is small, and it is quiet, and it is mine. I will not give it up. I understand. If you wish to be part of that life, you may stay, not as a duke, not as my rescuer, not as the man who came to restore my honor and carry me back to society. As a man, as yourself, on my terms in my world for as long as that arrangement suits us both. He was silent for a long moment. The gulls wheeled overhead. The tide was turning, the first of the fishing boats putting out from the harbor below. You are asking me to give up everything, he said. I am asking you nothing. I am telling you what I am willing to offer. The choice is yours. He looked at her. 6 months ago he would have argued. He would have listed the reasons this was impossible, his duties, his estates, his position, the demands of his name. She could see the old arguments rising in his face, the ingrained responses of a man who had been trained from birth to put obligation before desire. He did not speak them. I have a steward, he said slowly. He has managed the estates for 20 years. He is more competent than I am. My mother has been running the London house since my father died. She would be delighted to continue. Parliament sits without me. The ton will gossip whether I am there or not. I am, not as essential as I once believed. Lenora felt something loosen in her chest, something she had been holding so tightly she had forgotten it was there. Theodore can manage the family's interests in town, Alexander continued. He has been waiting his entire life for me to step aside and let him prove himself. He will be better at it than I ever was. You have thought about this. I have thought about nothing else for 7 weeks. He took a step toward her. You asked me once what would be enough. I have spent every day since trying to understand that the question was never about what I could offer. It was about what I was willing to let go. The sun broke through the clouds. The sea turned from gray to silver. Lenora felt the warmth on her face and the wind at her back and the solid, steady ground beneath her feet. I am not the woman you proposed to, she said. She does not exist anymore. I know. I will not be managed. I will not be protected. I will not be told what my duty requires. I know. If you ever ride away without explanation again, I will not wait. Not for an hour. Not for a minute. I will close the door and I will not open it. I know. She looked at him. The Duke of Ashworth. The man who had ridden through the night for a lie. The man who had searched 6 months for a woman who did not want to be found. The man who had mended a farmer's wall and carried a widow's shopping and sat in a storm-damaged inn and waited, simply waited, without demand or expectation. Then stay, she said. He did not sweep her into his arms. He did not fall to his knees. He did none of the things a duke might do in a novel or on a stage. He simply stood there on the cliff's edge with the dawn breaking behind him and the sea stretching endless before them, and he smiled. A quiet smile, a real one. Thank you, he said. They walked back along the cliff path together, side by side, neither leading nor following. At the cottage gate, the roses were blooming pink and white against the gray stone. The bean plants had reached the top of their stakes. The garden was thriving. Breakfast, Lenora said. I would like that. She opened the gate. He followed her inside. The cottage was small and plain and smelled of wood smoke and drying herbs, and it was hers. She would share it in time when she was ready, when the trust had grown roots deep enough to hold against the storms. For now, there was bread to slice and tea to brew and a morning to inhabit. She had walked out of a church in her wedding gown, and the world had declared her ruined. But the world, she had learned, was often wrong. Outside, the fishing boats were well beyond the harbor now, their sails white against the silver sea. Inside, the kettle began to boil. Lenora reached for the teapot, and Alexander reached for the cups, and neither of them spoke of London or titles or the life they had left behind. There would be time for all of that. There would be time for letters to be written and arrangements to be made and a mother and a brother and a village to be told. But first there was tea. There was bread and butter and the quiet comfort of a cottage kitchen. There was the man who had crossed England to find her, sitting at her table as if he had been there all along. She had chosen a different life. It turned out the life had chosen her back. The end.